Well, it's good to be with you all again. We're in our second module now on basic Bible interpretation, and in our first lesson, Rick did a great job covering the history of interpretation that was set forth in Dr. Zook's book on hermeneutics, I think covering chapters 1 and 2 for us. And now before we begin chapters 4 and following, which talks about bridging the gaps, we want to look at Dr. Zook's chapter 3 in a sense, and it's titled, Whose View is Valid? And it gives a short summary for us of these fundamental, foundational hermeneutical truths, or truths concerning the Bible that will be there with us as we progress onward in our understanding of bridging the gaps. And so we just want to spend a few minutes covering these foundational issues. And Dr. Zook talks to us in this chapter about he calls them axioms. And I'm not a math wizard and I'm not a logician, but he defines the axiom this way. In geometry, an axiom is a self-evident truth, a statement accepted as true for the sake of argument. In logic, an axiom is a statement that does not need proof to substantiate its validity. So that's what an axiom is. And now with respect to the Bible, there are essentially three axioms. He gives two, and I've added a third one, and we'll see why I've done that as we look at these axioms. I think it's a third good axiom to have. But so let's look at these three axioms together. And the first axiom that's foundational to our understanding of how to approach the Bible to get objective truth from it is this. It's a self-evident truth that the Bible is a human book. I think we would all, that is self-evident. He talks about this idea of communication, whether it's spoken or written. It involves a speaker or a writer, and in the Bible we have God directly speaking at times, and it's recorded, so it's written down. So we have God speaking, and we have a writer's recording. We have a message that's given to us in intelligible, audible sounds, spoken language, or intelligible written symbols called words. And then finally, there's the hearer of the message or the reader of the message. So these three things are involved in human communication. And so the purpose of the speaker or writer then is to convey to the hearers or readers the idea that he has in mind, the truth, let's say, that he wants to convey to us, whether it's God or in our culture, other human beings. We understand this, that the Bible is a human book designed to communicate to us, ultimately from God, truth. Now, given that axiom, and I guess in math and logic, there are corollaries or implications that flow out of these axioms. So with this axiom, the Bible is a human book, we want to cover just briefly these six corollaries that flow. So let's look at it. And these are pretty much self-evident. I don't think anyone would have any trouble with this or trouble understanding. First, each biblical writing, that is, each word, sentence, or book was recorded in a written language and followed normal grammatical meanings, including figurative language. And we're going to build on that. We're going to talk more about that and how language works as we get to bridging the gaps. And you'll see how in written language, as we go through it, you'll recognize the gaps that we're going to be talking about down the road to bridge, because it's part of understanding written language. And this is good. He says, this suggests that the Bible was not written in an unintelligible code to be deciphered by some magic formula. Rick sometimes talks about we don't need a decoder ring, like you'd get in those cereal boxes long ago to figure out the code. We don't need that. The words are immediately understandable. And a great example of that with regard to communication is Adam and God in the garden. When God speaks to Adam and says, Adam, you cannot eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day you eat from that tree, you're going to die. He understood that. That was a communication in a spoken sentence with commands and implications, and Adam didn't have any trouble. He didn't need a secret code to understand that. It's immediately understandable. Readers knew immediately the concepts being conveyed by the sentences in the Bible. They understood them in the way they would normally understand other sentences written in their languages. Whatever else was written in their language, whatever, it might be history, stories, accounts of other things, they would understand it naturally. They did not need to call on a wizard or a sorcerer or a person with unusual spiritual insight or mystic intuition to convey its meaning to them. No hidden meaning. Remember how Rick in the History of Interpretation talked about how people got into this idea of allegorizing things to find a hidden meaning behind the words that were written to either defend God's character or whatever they did. But that's not the way language works, okay? No hidden meaning. And of course, the language, though, includes idioms and unusual expressions unique to that language, figures of speech, which are very powerful. We'll talk about those as we go along. And also then, this corollary, and we'll talk about it more as we get to bridging the grammatical gap. This corollary suggests that the goal of Bible interpretation is to determine the original meaning of the text. The original meaning of the text. This is called exegesis, reading the meaning out of the text, as opposed to, and Rick mentioned this as well, eisegesis, reading a meaning into the text. Okay? So this is part of what it means to have written language. Secondly, each biblical writing was written by someone to specific hearers or readers in a specific historical, geographical situation for a specific purpose. That makes sense to us. This corollary suggests that each portion of the Bible was originally written to address a specific issue in a specific place to a specific audience, let's say, with a specific purpose in mind. So we want to discover the original meaning of the text in this context. What were the words conveying then to their initial readers? It doesn't matter whether you're talking about Genesis 1 or Revelation. There's this kind of need to understand, what did the original readers understand? That's always our starting point. And here's a good point for us, because this is violated all the time. If you don't understand what it meant to the original readers, how can you draw an application for us in our time, in our place in history, to transcend from or to move from their understanding to ours? If you get what they understood to be wrong, you're going to have a wrong application in our context. So you have to know what the original readers understood. Then we can bring it into our context to draw application. So number 2 is about context, isn't it? And I think Brother Rick mentioned this maybe, that everything we do is about context, and you're going to see number 2 is about context. Number 3 coming up is about context, and number 4 is about context. So number 3 then, context. The Bible is affected and influenced by the cultural environment from which each human writer wrote. It means you need to give attention to cultural matters. And next time, Rick will get into chapter 4 of Dr. Zook's book in the next lesson, and that has to do with bridging the cultural gap. Some really cool stuff in that chapter that to help us understand bridging that gap. Ignorance of certain cultural customs may lead certainly to faulty interpretations. We can't read our culture back over those words given to them in their culture and think we understand what they were being told. That's a wrong way to do it. And there's many areas of cultural impact: agriculture, architecture, geography, military issues, political aspects. And Rick's going to talk about all these really neat areas as we try to bridge that gap. Fourth, again, this is flowing from the fact that the Bible is a human book. It's the way language works. Each biblical writing was accepted or understood in the light of its context. So again, context, context, context. Understanding, now we're down to the words. A word or sentence in its context is another aspect of normal interpretation. It's how we normally approach any written material today, and also with the Bible. Here's a great example. A single word in a sentence may have several meanings. And any given word, if you go to the Webster's Dictionary, sometimes, often you'll see the words given, and then maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 different definitions. There's a range of meaning for that term. And Dr. Zook, if we had time, we'd kind of go through it together, but he gives this example of the word trunk. If I just said the word trunk to you, it brings up different ideas. And he gives you that range of meaning. It can mean a part of a tree, the proboscis of an elephant, a compartment at the rear of a car, a piece of luggage, the thorax of an insect. I didn't know that, but anyway, part of the human body, a circuit between telephone line exchanges. And so obviously, if you see that word in a sentence, it can't mean all those things. It has to mean one of those meanings in the context, and it will tell you in the context. Now, sometimes in the Bible, occasionally, a word will serve dual meaning, with a couple meanings being brought to bear. The author does that, and you can tell in context that he's doing that, but usually one meaning. Fifth, each biblical writing took on the nature of a specific literary form. This is called genre. Okay, it's a different kind of context, but it's still that idea. Though our usual way of understanding a piece of literature is its ordinary plain sense, we at the same time recognize that there's different kinds of literature. We don't read poetry the same way we read a science textbook about dark matter, per se. We don't do that. It's different genre, or a play, or that kinds of thing. Those kinds of things. Different kinds of literature. Unique characteristics accompany each genre. And in the Bible, as we interpret the Bible includes narrative literature, poetry, prophecy, letters like Paul's letters, the Proverbs, wisdom literature, that's what Proverbs is, drama, law, apocalyptic visions like in Daniel and Revelation, parables. Jesus taught so much through parables. And there was a reason for that. And then discourses, just interacting with verbal discourse. And if you're not aware of the different kinds of genre, you can misinterpret truth. A great example is like in Revelation, you have these locusts coming out of the abyss, and it's not attack helicopters, people, from the United States Army. That's not the way it works. Some people see that, but they're mixing up genres here. It's a symbolic vision. Sixth, and finally, each biblical writing was understood by its initial readers in accordance with the basic principles of logic and communication, and that's significant. When you approach any piece of writing, it doesn't matter what it is, a drama, newspaper, there's these normal things we expect to see in that communication. We give the writer the benefit of the doubt that he's not going to say one thing here and then the next sentence just flat contradict something he just said. That doesn't make sense to us. It's not logical in a sense. So in the Bible, same thing. Some critics of the Bible give secular writers this benefit of the doubt, but not the Bible. It doesn't make any sense. So, principles of logic and communication. When you read Paul's letters, you see a man who has a tight, logical, theological argument that flows as he makes his point powerfully, and it's logical as he communicates. All right. These 6 corollaries then suggest that in approaching the Bible, we ask the following questions which correspond to them. And that, on page 3 of your notes, what did the words convey in the grammar of the original readers? We're going to talk about that. That's one gap we bridge. What was being conveyed by those words to the initial readers, initial context? How did the cultural setting influence and affect what was written? Cultural gap. What is the meaning of the words in their context? That's, again, grammar and definition of words. In what literary form, genre, is the material written, and how does that affect the meaning? And then 6, how do the principles of logic and normal communication affect this meaning, the flow of thought in the text? So that is all tied to the axiom, first axiom, that the Bible is a human book. And now we're going to talk about the second 2 axioms.